see you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ginger Olszewski, and it's wonderful to see you all here today. Thank you for coming. I want to welcome everyone, and again, thank you for joining us tonight at our nonprofit Pat Conroy Literary Center's evening with novelist Susan Beckham Zurenda in conversation with Cassandra King. Our thanks as well to our book-selling partner for the evening, Nevermore Books. Copies of books by both authors will be available for sale and signing after their talk. Susan Zurenda taught English for 33 years on the college level and at the high school level to AP students. Her debut novel, Bells for Eli, has been selected as the gold medal winner for Best First Book of Fiction in the 2021 Independent Publisher Book Awards, and also as a Forward Indie Book Award finalist, a Winter 2020 Okra pick by the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance, a 2020 Notable Indie on Shelf Unbound, a 2020 finalist for American Book Fest Best Book Awards, and was nominated for a Pushcart Prize for 2021. She is here tonight on tour for her newly released second novel, The Girl from the Red Rose Motel. New York Times best-selling author Ron Rash praised Susan's new book with this endorsement. This excellent novel gives the reader superb insight into how events at a high school can ripple out to reveal the alliances and divisions within a whole town. Zurenda's characters are complex, and their story is deeply moving without veering into sentimentality. Bravo. And Ron's fellow best-selling author, Patty Callahan Henry, had this to say. In this beautifully written novel, a recently widowed English teacher takes a new job at a local high school, and we become deeply immersed in a world of privileged and poor students, parents who try to censor lessons, and considerable classroom challenges. The Girl from the Red Rose Motel is an authentic portrayal of life in a high school and beyond, as a young couple in love seeks their teacher's support amid a surfeit of obstacles. This emotionally complex story is impossible to put down. Tonight, Susan will be interviewed by the Conroy Center's own Cassandra King, the author of 5 best-selling novels and 2 nonfiction books, including most recently, Tell Me a Story, a memoir about her life with late husband Pat Conroy, which was named SEBA's 2020 Nonfiction Book of the Year. Please join me in welcoming Susan and Cassandra.
Thank you so much, and I want to welcome everyone to start with. We have people that have come all the way from upstate to be with us and to support Susie and so forth. And I'm thrilled to have all of you here. Please keep up with our programs and attend as many as you can, because we just have some of the best programs. We have one coming up Thursday night too that I'll tell you all about toward the end of our program tonight. But welcome to all of you. It's great to have you. And it is just a real privilege for me to interview one of my dear friends, Susie. Susie and I have so much in common, and I think that might be one reason I love this book so much. I loved her first book, and you heard all those accolades. Trust me, all of those are not just, little things like I was number 24 in Amazon's best book about Amazon leaders or something, those are very impressive things, and well deserved, and I can't imagine that this book won't do the same, because as much as I like the first book, I love this one so much, and it's because it's about a teacher, and a teacher much like Susie and I. Fortunately, I only had to teach high school seniors 2 years. So I've never been so glad to go to graduate school and be able to teach college college kids, but, and they both, trust me, have their challenges. Yeah, you put up with parents on one level, and then the students themselves on the other level, the ones that are not doing the work, but they gotta keep their scholarship and, all this sort of stuff. So they both have their unique challenges, but we're gonna talk more about that in a minute. Now, I'm going to start off by asking Susie the question that I hate for anyone to ask me when I'm being interviewed. Y'all, the very first time I got on a big TV thing, and I was so nervous. I had never been on TV before, and I was so nervous. And I had actually, my publisher actually hired a coach, because they knew how nervous I was, and helped me all the questions that they could have asked me. The guy sat down since she came up, and here come the cameras. He said, "Tell me about your book." That wasn't one of the questions. Nobody wants to hear that. But Susie, tell us about your book.
You're asking me that, Sandra. No, I'm just kidding. First of all, thank you to the Pat Conroy Literary Center for having me here, and thank you to my dear friend Cassandra for her kindness in being here with me tonight and interviewing me. So the Girl from the Red Rose Motel is the story. It's told in 3 points of view. It is the story of start with Sterling, brilliant, arrogant, affluent young man who's in the 12th grade in high school and he's on top of the world in his AP class. And he's so on top of the world that he has banded with several other boys like him way back in middle school, and they have had a gang mentality, and they've been terrorizing their teachers ever since to prove they're smarter than their teachers, and they probably were, because Sterling is an amalgam of 8 boys who call themselves the Crazy Eights, and I call them the Hateful Eightful, who actually existed. There are only a couple of things in this book that are based on real incidents. That's one of them. Mind you, one is not that I had an affair with the principal. It was really the vice principal. I'm kidding. So Sterling and 2 of his miscreant friends way overstepped their bounds in English class. And their teacher, Angela Wilmore, decides if nobody else has ever punished them, that's okay. She's had enough. And she sends them to in-school suspension, a lowly place Sterling never imagined finding himself. But there he meets a bright but very disadvantaged junior. He's initially attracted to her because she's very beautiful, and she's exotically beautiful to him. She doesn't look like he looks. He's a wasp. Mm-hmm. And she's very shy. She's very ashamed. She doesn't want anybody to know that she lives in the Red Rose Motel. So their love story actually, I guess, begins to take shape in ISS, and it is fraught with complications really you might never imagine. But there is this thing called the capacity for love and empathy that helps them through somehow. And their English teacher, Angela Wilmore, who has her own story arc, she has one of the points of view, gets overly involved in their lives. But then, yeah, there is that thing about her and the divorce principal also.
Oh, you did a good job. The reason that's a hard question is it's really hard to talk about your book without giving away.
It is.
And you want people to read it, and you want to sit there and tell them the whole story.
Right, and I probably already talked too long about it. That's the other problem.
Not at all, but that's the thing. So you intrigued us enough. One thing, Susie, that I have to say that I like so much about your book, besides the subject matter that I could relate to, I could relate on other levels that I think those of you, especially from Beaufort, could, is that it's set in a small town. And at one point, you said there were 1,600 students. Now, I wasn't sure if in the high school, you remember if you were attending for. So it's fairly.
It is the high school, but it's the one high school for the whole area.
Oh, okay.
For the whole town, really.
Yeah. Well, then that that makes it more like here too. But it was the small town intrigue. You see so much of there, and you've got all the sports heroes, and you've got the cheerleaders, and you've got the popular kids, and the great thing that you did with this is that, and this is hard to do, is that I didn't find any of these to be cliches. You know, I found these to be really interesting people, even some of the ones that we didn't like as much. But you know, a lot of times those are the ones with the most interest.
That's right.
So do you wanna, let me stick a little bit more with my, I was about to say, you wanna tell us about some of those? Well, we'll get into it by just talking a little bit about your inspiration for you said you got the young man and then the junior, the young woman, who's the one that's in the Red Rose Motel. I want to call it the Rose Motel. And then the teacher. And I believe you have the teacher in her 40s.
No, she's in her 50s. She's
Oh,
53.
good. I like her even
She's
better than
53.
Yeah, she's real close to my age. So, yeah. So, she maybe is more you.
Well, people ask me that, is Angela Wilmore based on me? And I kind of wish she was, because she's pretty cool,
She's
likable teacher, but unfortunately, she's a lot nicer and funkier than I ever was in the classroom. My students tended to thank me like a year or two after they had me. If they didn't, I did, some of them did thank me, but I think maybe I was kind of a stern teacher. But the inspiration for, yes, Angela exists because I taught high school the last 10 years of my career, and I understand it. It does come out of my experience, even though, like I said, I don't really think Angela, maybe there's some of me in Angela, I hope so, because she's pretty cool teacher, but anyway, I don't really think there is. I had a kind of, for lack of knowing the right word to use, a kind of a bipolar life as a teacher at Spartanburg High School, because I taught the 4 12th grade AP classes. So you have the smartest, usually from the most well-off families, at any rate families that highly valued education. These kids had a lot of support from home. Most of them were self-motivated to get as much college credit in high school as they could. So all of them at the top of the heap. And then I had a 5th class called Reading Strategies, a class that was instituted when South Carolina had an exit exam required for graduation, and I don't think that's in place now. But there were so many kids whose reading levels were far too low to even think about passing that exit exam. So I was charged with the responsibility to try to help some of these kids read well enough to pass that exit exam. And I began this wide disparity between the 2 groups of students that I taught was certainly it was an inspiration. I wanted to see what would happen if you took an arrogant kid like Sterling and you tried to think about what would bring out his humanity, what would create empathy in him. And it turned out to be Hazel. Now, Sterling has got some baggage of his own from childhood, which makes him key into Hazel's shame, and that helps. But bringing those two, I wanted to think about how you can bring very different people together. And I include the English teacher in this trio. You can bring very different people together with completely different backgrounds, and what can happen is it is mutually beneficial for all. And you don't realize it until you really start to study the human nature and the interactions, and you realize, wow, yes, people from very different places can help each other.
Yeah, I'm so glad you put it that way, because you really just gave those of you that are interested in writing a little writing lesson there as well, because I've heard other writers say the way, people say, how do you get inspired to tell the story and stuff like that. You imagine you put these people in a situation and how would they react, and if you need an impetus to get you going on a story, sometimes that's a good way to do it. So I hadn't really thought about that, but I can see now with your character, because it first you're not gonna like this sturdy kid. You're gonna slap the little smart butts faces, you know, because they're, you know,
I went to Spartanburg High School, so easy on that.
Slow down. I tell you.
But
You
yeah,
know,
nobody
you
wanted to teach any of those.
Yeah.
Gloria, my
Eric.
friend, is sitting in the back. She was a guidance counselor at school
Oh.
district, and she knows exactly the boys I'm talking about, right, Gloria?
People ask me all the time, who are they?
Yeah.
And I don't wanna say.
Who were they?
Well, I was not one of the hateful eight, but I was one of the sinful seven.
Oh.
So y'all were doing that way back, you know?
Yeah, way back, way
I
back.
mean, I went to school with those boys. You know,
Yeah, they
Yeah.
existed. They were ubiquitous. Yeah.
Yeah.
Every year.
Yeah, so I think that pretty much talks about, because I'm always interested as a writer myself in how other people decide on their points of view. So how do you decide? One of the first things even an agent said to me is, okay, whose story is this? Because I told my first book in like 4 different, and you need to know whose story is this. Now we get a good clue from the title, I think, on whose story it is ultimately. But I think by having different points of view, what you're doing with that, well, hear what you think too, is having this, you place these people in this situation to see how they're going to react, and you get different reactions from these,
Right.
different kinds.
Right. Sterling was actually the character I started with because I had written a short story and it got published and I kept thinking about it and it wouldn't let go of me because it was actually based on that experience with those boys. So I started with him, and then Hazel emerged as the person he needed in his life to give him a different map of the world. And as it went along, I realized Hazel was emerging as the protagonist, that she was the girl that the book was really going to revolve around. And she needed a mentor. She needed someone to help her in a way that her family could not. And Angela Wilmore was born, or became a main character. She was always Sterling's teacher, but she became a main character, and they all came together. And I thought briefly about trying to write from the omniscient, all-knowing point of view, and I played with it a little bit, and I thought, no, I can't get close enough. All these characters have their story arc, and I couldn't get close enough to any one of them doing it that way. So I said, I'll just see if I can do this. And
Well,
that's
it's
it.
a perfect book, really, to illustrate one of my favorite Buddhist sayings that I used to say was my philosophy of life, and that's when the pupil is ready, a teacher appears. And I think you illustrate that each one, even the teacher herself, what does she get from these
Exactly.
students?
Oh
you know?
gosh, yes. Yeah, her life is hugely enlarged.
Yes.
Somewhat by Sterling, but terrifically by Hazel.
Hazel, certainly. Let's talk a little bit about Hazel and her situation. Did you have students that you knew were homeless? And well, they weren't homeless because they rented.
They're called sheltered homeless.
Yes,
is how they're
yes.
referred to. I can't tell you definitively, but one student that I had whom I know lived in a motel, and that's because one afternoon after school, this young man stayed after because he was a whiz with computers, and I was not and am not. And he was helping me figure something out on the computer. Well, I assumed, he's a bright kid, that he probably had a car or a friend, and he offered to stay, and we got finished, and he said, I need a ride home. And, you're not supposed to take a student home. You're not supposed to put them in your car. So I said, okay, let's go. Where are we going? And lo and behold, we pull up in front of a motel out on the interstate. It wasn't the worst one in town, but it wasn't too swift either. And I said, Malik, I can't leave you here. And he said, yeah, you can. This is where I live. And so that's when I first kind of knew that. One of the big inspirations is Gloria sitting in the back of the room. She, being a guidance counselor, came to know about all these kids with families living in motels. You think that folks living in motels are all drug addicts or prostitutes and blah, 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 but they're not. There are a lot of families, and there are a lot of reasons, general reasons, that families end up in this predicament, and Hazel's family is one of those reasons. Her father was gainfully employed, but with his brother, they had a trucking business. The brother had bought the semi-truck. Hazel's father drove the truck, and then the brother decided to get a second truck, and everybody's excited, but then the brother wants Hazel's father, Burl, to be an employee, not an equal partner. Burl falls out with him, goes into a downward spiral, turns more and more to alcohol. Hazel's mother gets a certification to be a CNA, but it's not enough. It is not enough to pay the bills, and they get evicted. So Gloria, came to realize the situation with families, and she subsequently, did you start the nonprofit, Gloria, before or after you retired? Way before, that's what I thought. It's called CAST in Spartanburg. It's Care, Accept, Share, Teach. And it is a nonprofit organization whose mission it is to assist these families, whether it's helping them get the money for a deposit, which is so much, to have a rental, or just helping the kids buy shoes, or sending them to summer camp in Spartanburg in the summer. So that and my own students, and of course, I don't know, I can't tell you whether a lot of the kids I taught in reading strategies lived in motels, but I would bet my bank account that a good number of them did.
Yeah. I figured you probably had some dealings with well, I think it's almost impossible to talk about this book, and I want to be sure to leave time, because we already get some conversations generated, so I know people are excited to talk more about it too. But there's so much now about what teachers face. You could not pay me enough money to go back to teaching.
I don't know if you could be either.
And I have nieces that are teachers. So it's Kathy, I got a nephew. That's teacher and his wife. And I just, what you have to do as a teacher now is so different. That's when we thought we had it bad.
Yeah. No.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
I can.
Some of the things that.
I was a very fortunate teacher in that I worked for a school district where I got administrative backing. And if I had trouble with a student, the situation was taken care of. That's an exception to the rule, I fear, these days. I've looked up all the things that are, we're in a teaching crisis. I think, I'm trying to remember, please don't quote me, but you can look it up, the statistic. I think we had 1,400 openings that weren't filled in South Carolina this year. It was just unbelievable. Nobody wants to go into teaching. First of all, teaching salaries have never been high. It's a calling. You do it because you feel called to do it, and you hope that you have enough money to survive. But you don't go into teaching for the money. And I'm always saying, I hope before I die that teachers will earn a professional wage the way other professions do. You got huge class loads. You've got administrations now that are afraid. And I'm going to just tell you this really quick story. My older daughter taught for 7 years. That was it. And she always taught at need students. The last school where she was, she took a position. Her child was born, and then she stayed out just a few months, and then she was in a different town, and she took a position in mid-year. The teacher had left in the fall, These 6th grade kids had subs for weeks and weeks. You know, she was warned they would be unruly because they'd had subs for so long. Unruly wasn't the word for it. By the end, I mean, she went in there, first of all, there were really no materials for her to work with, to speak of, so she's going home and she's working on modules and lesson plans, and the other 6th grade teachers are helping her, and they are very kind. But it came to pass that she tried to, what we call, write up a student, and they told her, no, don't do that. That's bad on our scores. Do not write up a student because does not look good for our scores. So she, I think a couple of times the vice principal just came and maybe stood in the doorway, but you know, that quieted them down for a few minutes. The day that the kid picked up the desk and threw it, picked up a desk and threw it, was the day she came home and said, I quit. I'm not, somebody's gonna get hurt, and it might be me, but if it's not me, it's gonna be somebody, and somebody's gonna get sued, and that really might be me. And that was it. Now she's gone back to be a reading coach. She has done some things in some charter schools, but I don't think she'll ever go back in a traditional classroom. And that's, there you go. Need I say more? That's in South Carolina.
Okay, we're gonna have to talk about the elephant in the room. There are a lot of themes in the story. One of them is very timely. It's something the Literary Center has been involved in. It's where Jonathan is tonight. And that is the question of parental involvement in censoring books. And that, was that already, when you started this, was this already
that was in the book from the beginning, but it was not
the headline.
Not the headline it is right, it has become.
Yeah, it's really become quite an issue, and we read about it all the time, and we're going to be very careful discussing, because we're not going to get into politics or anything here. It's, and you know, those of us who are book lovers, readers and all, you know, there are different ways of looking at this. There are certainly some trashy books out there that I would not want my grandkids, you know, looking at. You know.
Right.
But now I know for myself, I was not allowed to read Peyton Place, for example. How long do you think it took me to get?
Crawl on your bed.
And so my mother would not let me read movie magazines because they were trash. And, you know, this sort of stuff. So I'm familiar with censorship, parental censorship on a personal level as well. But let's talk about it as it applies to one of the themes in your book. Because what you got to do, you've already set up the conflict, but as a writer, you got to have the conflict to go in to make a story. And that's what I was going to tell you. One thing I love about you know, we all love a page-turning book. And I think when we hear page-turner, we think about thrillers and legal things. Well, we just got to know who did it, you know, this kind of stuff. I love the kind of quiet page-turners, you know, that are more about domestic issues and things like this and just small-town people and stuff. But you become these characters become so invested in them as a reader that you want to know, and you do such a good job with that in this book, Susie, I promise you. I just kept, and you know, when I first read it, I kept thinking, oh man, she threw that at me. I didn't see that coming and stuff like that. So you do that a lot. Now, where was I going with that? Oh, so what
about Donovan?
Yeah, and yes, and one of the subplots and the conflict that we have is this thing that teachers are having to deal with now. Another fun thing about being a teacher, censoring of books. So you want to talk about and if you tell me. There again, I'm trying not to say but
I'll just say what happened, because I said there were really two things from real life that are in this book. One was that group of boys that catapults the story into action. Two was this set of parents whose daughter, and I've never had one whit of trouble out of this young lady. She was just as polite and nice. She wasn't a star student, but she was a good student. She was a hard-working student. And I get, I don't remember if it was a call or an email from the principal, and he says, we're going to have a meeting with these parents. They're objecting to a story that you taught in your AP English class. And I thought, okay. Now, first of all, you do teach out of a college anthology when you're teaching AP English, but it is a state-approved college anthology. And I was teaching from the Bedford Introduction to Literature. It's, you know, and that's the first thing I told the couple. I said, this is a state-approved textbook, and it's a college course. And yes, it's going to have some things in it that if you think your high school student should not be exposed to, then maybe we need to be in honors English. No. None of that. Well, this couple, and again, this is the other thing that I took from life, objected to a story by Margaret Atwood, who's one of my favorite all-time writers. And I had used her very short story, Happy Endings, that's an irony, isn't it? To introduce short fiction to the class, because it was like 3 pages long and I could hit every element and we could go and have an overview. It was the perfect little story to do that. Well, it's also a feminist story. It's also got some language in it. And this couple, particularly the husband, was infuriated, he said, about the language. It had the F word in it. But what high school kid has not heard that word, right? I don't care if they are taking a college level course. They mostly, they out there slaving in the hall. Anyway, I got in that meeting, and it was actually, I didn't put the English department head in the novel, and the man was not a very self-righteous minister. I just did that. I just got him back. But I got in that meeting. I'm stuck now. I got in that meeting, and I didn't even sit myself down well before he was just jumping all over me. And the principal, bless him, it was his first year of being the principal. And he threw me under the bus because they threw him under the bus. And this man was carrying on about the vile literature I was teaching, and that I needed oversight. And mind you, I really never had many parents complain. So I was blindsided. And then he proceeds to pull this piece of paper out of his pocket and read off to me that Margaret Atwood's been published in Playboy magazine. And then he reads off all these other great writers like Ernest Hemingway and Fitzgerald and all these incredible, what is this children's author, Shel Silverstein?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, has been published in Playboy. And I'm thinking in my head, wait a minute, mister, aren't you undercutting your argument? Because if Hemingway and Fitzgerald and a children's author have all been published in Playboy, would that not tell you that Playboy over the years has published some pretty fine literature? But no, he didn't see it that way at all. And I'm thinking, well, you've been reading a lot of Playboy.
But not every page.
Yeah. But at any rate, it was the most horrific grueling I had ever endured as a teacher. And they left, and because I made the suggestion that their daughter go to honors English. No. I made this, and then he wanted me to give her individual assignments that, now mind you, I got 78 AP students, and they write 12 essays each, and each one takes 20 minutes to grade, and so forth and so on. So he wants me to make up a curriculum for her that he can approve. And I'm looking at my principal, and he's just like, oh dear, he's like, what? And he looks at me and says, can you do that? And I said, no, I cannot do that. I said, I don't mind doing an occasional different assignment for a young person, but you start that kind of thing, you open that can of worms, and I'm going to have 78 different curricula going on. No, not doing it. Well, anyway, they leave, and my principal looks at me and he said, I'm sorry, I just had no idea. He said, I was a PE teacher to start with. I don't know anything about literature. I said, it's not your fault. He said, how about this? You will never, ever have to see that man again. And I said, thank you. And that's the kind of backing I got. And I didn't. I never had to see the man again. I never had to speak to the man again. I was very, very lucky. But it was the worst grueling I had ever undergone. And I think that now it's gotten really, I'm told, my friend Amber Bacon, who interviewed me for the Southern Review of Books, she knew this. Margaret Atwood is outlawed in schools in Florida. Some of her books. She wrote The Handmaid's Tale.
Right.
And that's one of those books that's often banned. And it's crazy. Crazy. I mean, that is. I'm like you, Cassandra. There's some books out there I don't want my grandchildren to read and all. But you have to say, here's a teacher who's been teaching literature for many, many, many years. She's got a bachelor's degree. She's got a master's degree. She understands literature. You have to trust her as a professional to know what is proper or correct or helpful or beneficial to her students and what is not. You have to give your teachers and your librarians the professionalism that is their due.
And I think that's one of the big.
I think that's the difference.
Yeah, the big problems though is that teachers are not treated like professionals.
That's it. That's it in a nutshell. And I was fortunate that the parents, I mean, the mother never said anything. You know, that tells you something there. She never said a word. But the fact that my principal, you know, I mean, it was bad during the meeting because he didn't know what to do, but he did the right thing in the end.
It's because also if you're teaching, as you said, AP English. I mean, one of the things you're a teacher. One of the reasons that we read literature is to understand all different kinds of people and situations and so forth. If you only read, you know, just the whitewash little, you know, Mary Had a Little Lamb story.
But you're going to learn about human beings.
Yeah, and so, you know, it's just a problem on so many levels. And you think about if you let the parents, as you were saying, control.
Yeah, I mean, what if my principal had said, no, you're going to have to give this kid all these assignments and stuff? Because what I started to say and got off track, it wasn't, my intuition tells me it wasn't really the language so much that bothered him. That was what he said. What bothered him was the feminism in the story. That's what bothered him.
Well, and I think in Handmaid's Tale, I don't think the language is even in there. I think that is the feminist story there. All right, I guess I will leave some plenty of time for discussion because you got a lot to talk about, and I'm trying to see if there's anything that I have left out. We've covered a lot. I loved you talked about this to start with. Is the another theme is working with forbidden love, and we have a couple of those. Now we're doing forbidden in quotes because you know exactly what would be qualified these days as forbidden love. But you know, you think back if you use Romeo and Juliet to introduce us to the movie. That's what I thought about in reading this too. You have these two, you know, from totally different backgrounds and their attraction, but you also already given away about the teacher and the
That starts early on.
Yeah, so. I didn't see that coming at first because he sounded kind of wimpy when she was he sounded a little bit cute, and, you know, but then I really grew to like him. But they certainly had to deal with, okay, here's a principal and a teacher. They kind of need to keep this quiet and so forth. So I always think that all the best stories have a love story in them.
Yeah. We're just so drawn to that most powerful of emotions.
Absolutely. So and you had, you know, several things going on with that. I really appreciate. Well, let's kind of draw this to to a close here. I think we kind of covered this one, but for obvious reasons, there's a quote here. Susie sent me, she was being interviewed and someone quoted me and said, I don't remember.
And he was correct, but.
Well,
go ahead,
I'm
read
not
that.
reading the first part.
Please.
About how wonderful I am.
Well, want me to
But-
not read it?
No, no. I don't, I sort of remember saying this, but I was thinking I was just making this up, but writing is more than a calling, writing is more than a vocation, in so many ways it's an act of courage. And I think with this book, I think any time we as writers tackle subjects that, people are uncomfortable with, you're going to get some feedback. Well, she just left the politics out of this book, it'd been good. I see that sometimes on review, when I'm looking over to reviews. You already gotten any?
I've gotten a couple of threes. So far, so good.
Yeah. It does. I think, as a writer, you can't let that dictate
Right.
what you write.
And,
It's sort of
yeah,
like you can't let these things dictate what you teach.
That's right.
Well, and I know what I was gonna say about that. In the AP, in classes, we encourage students to look at conflicting,
Right.
points of view.
That's right.
And so when you censor also, you deny them
Right.
to debate. I used to make my students, we would have an issue that we would talk about, and I would say, okay, how many of you, agree that, guns should be controlled, or what, and okay, you get over here, and how many of you disagree with this, you get over here. Now, they're gonna debate each other, and then I'd have them switch. Take that. And I just think, that's what we've gotta, that's what education is.
And I think that's the courage, it takes a great deal of courage for Sterling to, he of course he's physically attracted, but it takes a whole lot of courage for him to step outside his circle, so to speak, and especially with his parents, and embrace Hazel. It takes a great deal of courage for Hazel to try to figure out how to get out of the cycle of poverty. And it takes a great deal of courage for Angela to get as involved as she does with Hazel's life.
So there's certainly something of the courageous, interaction of some of these students.
Because they're all so different.
And then I thought it had a very moving ending, and I certainly won't say more about that, because I know you're all dying to read it. But let's, if you would, if you have a question, for Susie, raise your hand so we can make sure everybody, Mary Ellen.
All right, this is a two-part question. First is, has anybody in the book recognized themselves? And then, has anybody who isn't in the book thought they were?
Okay, that's a good question. No, Hazel is really completely out of my imagination, though I taught plenty of students like her. And after, I was telling Sandra this earlier, after I turned the book in to, we had the same agent, that was when I remembered this young lady named Rakisha, who was very, in my reading strategies class, who was very determined, had a very positive spirit, and she passed that exit exam and wrote me a beautiful, beautiful thank you note that I had saved. But I don't know where she is. She might recognize elements of herself, even though I wasn't conscious of a model for her. Any of those 8 boys ever get hold of the book? They might recognize themselves. And I've had a couple of my fellow teachers from Spartan High, they're so funny. One in particular has read the book, and she texted me. She said, well, I thought for a minute when it was like after that snowstorm and the school had opened back up, the school was freezing cold, and she got the heater out of the closet. This was a teacher who was always cold, always had about 4 coats on. And she said, I thought it was me. And then she turned it on and let her students have some of the heat. I knew it wasn't me. So I haven't really, other than some of those funny sort of things from some of my colleagues at Spartan High who've read the novel. No, I haven't had anybody say that they thought that. Now there is one character. His name is Judson Moore. He's a minor character, but he is patterned after a teacher whom I admired greatly. He just retired this year. He never had to do anything like this character does to Donovan Powell, who tries to get into Miss Wilmore's classroom, who is the character based on that father that I got back. But yeah, he recognized himself, and he read it and he recognized himself, or I should say, the woman whom he dates, who was also an English teacher, recognized. And she said, "Oh, you've immortalized Bob," and I said, I have. So yeah, I mean, there are a few things like that.
I wanna know when you hear from the boys.
Yeah, I'm waiting on that.
Or their parents.
Or their parents.
How old would those boys be now? What age, how long ago did this happen?
Good while back. It would have happened probably around the year 2001, 2002, or 3 maybe.
You've been
So-
dreaming about them a long time.
Not just I, but after I sent those 3 that day to in-school suspension, I can't tell you the number of teachers who thanked me, who came to my door, wrote me emails and said that should have been done a long time ago. And I thought, why are they second semester seniors and we're just now calling them to task? But it's because they were so smart and they were from influential families, etc. Gloria.
Susie, I did have a mother who came to me and said, "I hope it was not," and she named her child.
She hoped he was.
I
love it.
Straight face.
There have been a number of people who.
Oh, I'm so glad to know
son
this.
Come say, "Was it me?"
I love it. Sounds like
Well,
it's a
you
song.
can just tell them the truth that Sterling is an amalgam of that
I
crowd.
say I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know which one it was.
And you had your hand up earlier.
I wanted to ask, I think, I'm about halfway through your book, and I'm glad to know that these characters were the early 2000s, because it missed me by 25 years. So I feel better about that, but
Well, actually, I shouldn't have said that. That's not right. It was more like probably, I set the book in 2012. I don't remember what year I had those boys. It was a little earlier than 2012, so I just told an untruth. It was more
wasn't
like
in the
probably
70s, was it?
2010. No.
Anybody that grew up in a small town in the South, I'm about halfway through your book. I've only had it for 1 day, so I only got halfway through. But can really relate to this, and I'm. It's not like everybody can't relate to it, but anybody that grew up in a small town in the South, it's like, well, she's writing about me. She's writing about the high school experience that that we all had, and particularly the brilliant job you do of dealing with the haves, which are in every textile town in the
Yes,
South, the haves
yes.
versus the have-nots, who are the people who worked in the textile mill. And it's so, dealing with that contrast and conflict is very, very, very
Well,
interesting.
thank you.
And handled so well. That's what I was trying to say earlier, because I think it's really hard to do that as a writer without having just the stereotypical, this and that, the other with this. Yeah, all right, Susan.
I read online a review, and some readers had made some comments, and one asked a question I'm going to ask you again.
Okay.
Could this not be a YA young adult book, or could it be a crossover, or how do you?
Yeah,
You said you hadn't
and I
thought
have
of
been
it.
asked that a number of times because one of the main settings in the book is a high school. But it's just, it doesn't feel like a YA book to me at all.
Okay. I haven't read it yet.
It's got, I don't know, Sandra, how do I explain this? But I do hope that older high school students might read it and might glean something about differences and how we bridge those. I do hope that, but I don't think it's
It's
not
what I think of as a YA book at all.
yeah, and I don't know how to define the difference.
But I would, I was thinking about giving one to my granddaughter who went to college, for the first time.
What about a
I
junior
think
or
it-
senior in high school?
I think so.
I think so.
I think so. Again, yeah, there's some mature stuff in there. There's some sex in there. But again,
Surprise, surprise.
yeah, surprise, surprise.
They're gonna say, oh, this is lame.
Yeah, exactly. They'll say this is lame.
Tell me about the cover. I think the cover's beautiful. Did you design it? Did you have a yes or no at the end?
That's
Did
a
you
good.
smile when you saw it? How did
I
it
was pretty
work out?
stunned when I saw it, to tell you the truth. But because with my first book, my publisher, my editor wrote me an email and said, "You can send us ideas for the cover. We probably won't take them, but you can send them, and we'll consider them." And they actually did take an idea of mine and actually an old photograph of a home that was in my family, and they graphicked it all up and everything. So I had an idea about this one, and I thought I would like to see a girl coming out of an old motel room with a backpack or whatever on her shoulder, and she's moving out and away from that world because that's what Hazel wants to do. That ain't what this is what they sent me. And at first I was just like, whoa, but now, but pretty soon it grew on me because I think I love the colors, and I think it's very attention getting, and I love the old motel key, indicates an old, you don't see those anymore, an old rundown motel.
Okay, Terry.
Okay, I'd like to know, what is your your writing strategy? Do you work so many hours a day? And also, are you writing on something else already?
I'm unfortunately not a very disciplined writer. I know, a lot of writers I know, they get up in the morning when it's quiet and they drink coffee and they say they're gonna write X number of words a day, or they're gonna write for X number of hours a day. No. When I'm working on something, I'm gonna write probably every day. It's gonna be hard for me not to write every day. But first of all, I write at night, which is not something I recommend for anyone. First of all, I prefer a glass of wine to a cup of coffee because that helps my inner critic go to sleep. I mean, and I'm not talking about too much wine, but I'm just saying I have a very strong inner critic, and I can write a few sentences and then I look at it and I go, oh my God, that's awful. And then maybe I've destroyed something I shouldn't have. But when it's dark and there are no distractions, and that's when I can relax, and that's when I can write, and the subconscious goes into gear. And I might write for 2 hours a day, and I might look up at 3 o'clock in the morning and it might have been 7 hours. But there's some kind of mysterious shut-off valve in my head, and this may be true for you, Sandra. It's just like when you've gotten to the point and that's all you can write for that day, click, it's done. And I might be in the middle of a sentence, and that's it, I'm done. Now, in the daytime, I revise. I go back and look at what in the world did I say last night? What in the world did I create? And that's when I try to mold it, so to speak.
You want to address?
Oh,
what
am I
you're
writing
working on?
something else? I'm not sure yet. I've been interviewing this 40, I guess she's probably 41 by now, 41-year-old woman on Zoom. We did this for several months. I was introduced to her by this lovely 85-year-old lady who came up to me after an event in Darlington, South Carolina, and she said, I know people say this to you all the time. I know a story that needs to be told. And I said, She said, but this one really, would you be willing to meet with this young woman if I arranged a lunch for us in Columbia? And I don't know why I said yes, but I said yes. And I like her very much. Her mother forced her into marriage at age 15, and it was a very abusive marriage. And it is again, a life, it's just unimaginable to me. The best part of it was rattlesnake rodeos. I mean, that was the good part. I don't know. I mean, I like her very much. She has, the thing that appeals to me is she got out of that situation of her own willpower. She is in a functional life with a good man from what she tells me, and she owns her own cleaning business and she hires employees. But if I decide to fictionalize, I told her I'm not gonna write somebody else's memoir. But if she's interested in my fictionalizing that story, meaning some would be true and some would not be, the reason I'll do it is I am stunned by her capacity for forgiveness. She has forgiven that mother and takes care of that
I
mother.
think you've got a story there.
Takes care of that mother. It's just amazing to me.
That's amazing. Well, our time is up, folks.
Sorry, I'm so long-winded.
Oh, no, it's fascinating. So what I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to let Susie go to Pat's desk.
Oh, I'm so excited.
I know, it's always so fun. To sign books, and so you'll pick up your book, you want to get a book and get one signed. And remember, they make great Christmas presents, birthday presents, and so forth.
And you want to tell about Thursday.
Thursday evening, we have, I'm gonna be up here running my mouth again, but I'm going to be joined by three lovely ladies, and we're going to be talking about angels and unusual phenomenon like that. And these are true happenings that a friend of mine, Susan Cushman, has made a collection of, we were discussing this one evening about, do you believe that angels, are real in our life, and then talking about after before death experiences and things like that. And so it's a really fascinating book and fascinating story, so I think you will enjoy hearing from these other women who contributed to this book. So if you can come Thursday night, it's the same setups, 5 o'clock and 5 to 6, and then we'll have a signing afterwards. So thank you, and thank all of you.
Thank you so much.